Ideally, that's the way we're trying to.
Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today we're going to talk about upgrading the trigger on the Glock 42 and Glock 43. When they were first announced, on the site the specs were that the trigger was a 5.5 pound trigger like all of the other standard Glocks, but they really never met that expectation. These were ones I got early on. One of them, the first one I got, was the first release. I ordered it as soon as it was showed at SHOT Show and got one of the first ones to hit the street, and its trigger was around 8 pounds. After polishing it, it kind of came down maybe about a half pound, and the best it could do was about 7.5 pounds. I ended up having to send both of these back to Glock to do the fixes for the jamming, and we've got a video on that. It shows fixing the early problems with failure to feed and things like that. And when it came back, the trigger was right around 6.5 pounds, and that's where they've been. Finally, there is a connector available, like there's been historically for the other Glocks. It's made by Ghost, and this particular one is the Edge connector. And it's roughly equivalent to the Glock minus connector that you can get in the Glock competition guns, which, though you can't order them from Glock for any other gun, they're readily available on the open market. They don't fit the 42 and 43, they use a different connector, and Ghost has come out with one. So let's talk about these guns. Let me show you what that connector does. As you saw from the intro video, the first shots were taken with this gun here, which has the stock connector on it, and I'll demonstrate the trigger. And this one is coming in right around 6.5 pounds when I measure it. That second grouping was done with this gun, which has the Ghost connector in it, and the trigger is coming in right around 4.5 pounds. So it did make about a 2 pound difference, and it also significantly smoothed out the trigger. Makes it a lot easier for a gun this small and this thin to stay on target with it. Now, as far as the sights go, this one does have the TFO sights, which are a combination fiber optic day-night sight, but both of us are very able to use the Glock U-Dot sights, so I really don't think the sights themselves played much into that difference between those two groupings. Really, it was the difference in the trigger. So if I take the first one, first I'll show you that it is unloaded. If I take the first one, cycle it, you got some take up, then you hit a very noticeable wall, and it's a very stiff, firm wall. I'm slowly putting a significant amount of additional pressure on this trigger, and then it finally breaks. When it breaks, it's a short, crisp break like you're used to. And then you've got the same short reset, but I'm up against that very stiff, hard wall. And it's actually hard enough that as you're trying to pull it, it feels like it should have broken by now, especially if you're used to other Glocks. And that'll make you have a tendency to kind of do a little bit of this, or maybe adjust your hand, and that'll pull your aim off. I'll show you the new trigger. First I'll show you the gun is unloaded. I'll take the magazine out to make the rest of this easier. You've got a slightly less take-up. It's a little bit shorter take-up. Once you're on the wall's a little longer, but it's a very smooth wall, and I really never hit a point where it felt like I was having to put excessive pressure. You still hit the defined wall, and you still got that nice short reset, and when you're back on the wall, again, you get a little bit of movement in the wall, and then it breaks again. But the big difference between this is, in addition to being about 2 pounds lighter, which the difference between 6.5 pounds and 4.5 pounds is fairly significant, it never felt like I was having to put excessive pressure and wondering when it was going to break. If you let it all the way back out, you've got your take up, that slightly longer wall, and a nice crisp break. So overall, that connector made the trigger significantly smoother and easier to use. Here's what the connector looks like. Here's the packaging for it. And these are available in a number of different places. I got this one on Amazon. And they make two different models of this. This is called the edge connector, and this is a drop-in connector, and I'm going to show it to you in a second, but it's a drop-in connector. You take the gun apart, put the connector in, and you go. There's no gunsmithing or any filing or any kind of adjustment you need to do. And look for our video on installing the connector itself. Installing the connector, the process is the same for all the Glocks. So we've done a video on installing a connector in a Glock, as well as full disassembly all the way down to the bare parts and reassembly of a Glock. But this is what the connector looks like. This is the part that connects the trigger bar to the sear assembly. And when I turn it around, this angle up at the top right here, let me get my little pick so I can show you that angle. This little piece here, this little lip, that angle is what determines the trigger characteristics. And changing that angle will change the length of the wall. It'll also change how heavy the trigger is. It affects the physics and the fulcrum effect. And this little piece that sticks up is the stop. Now they also make one called a Pro version. And you may want to think carefully before you choose the Pro version. The Pro version adds another arm sticking out that's an over travel stop. And what an over travel stop does is it limits trigger over travel. Once the sear breaks, it stops the trigger from going any further. That one does require some filing and gunsmithing. And if you don't get it quite right, you can find yourself in a situation where the trigger either doesn't reset or the trigger refuses to break. Which on a competition gun, it could cause you just to miss your competition, lose, hurt your score. But on a carry gun, which is really what these things are designed for, it could put you in a situation where you have a dead trigger, and that wouldn't be a desirable situation. So in all reality, the edge trigger, edge connector, which is this one, that doesn't try to affect the over travel and doesn't require any adjusting or gunsmithing, is really the one to choose for these guns. And the over travel stop on these guns really wouldn't be a significant improvement. So for $20 to $30, depending on where you pick it up, you can significantly improve your Glock 42 and 43 trigger and bring it in line with all of the other Glocks and give you the trigger that this gun was really advertised to have and should have had all along. So if you like our videos, give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, look for our video on actually installing this connector, and have a great day. Thank you.